All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's event, Opportunity for All, Lessons Learned in the Campaign to Allow All Students, regardless of immigration status, to work at the University of California. I'm Ahilan Arulanandam, Faculty Co-Director of the UCLA Center for Immigration Law and Policy here at UCLA School of Law. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this event is taking place both over Zoom and on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. That acknowledgement feels particularly appropriate today for this event because at its most basic level, we're here because our government treats some people living here as outsiders, even though we're all living on stolen land. I also want to acknowledge that many people are understandably focused on events in the Middle East right now. I am too. But I also know that the issues we'll be discussing today are just as urgent now as they were a few weeks ago. So I truly appreciate people being with us today for this event. Before I go further, I'd also like to thank the communications gurus here at the Center for Immigration Law and Policy who made this event possible, including our superb program coordinator, Chloe Lynn, who's running the show behind the scenes, and our communication strategist, Haley Burgess, who has done superb work bringing the Opportunity for All message to the world. I'm going to talk about that message for a few minutes to give context for this event. So I'm going to sort of give some remarks here now for a few minutes, and then I'll introduce our three wonderful panelists for today's conversation. I wanted to start with some context because I think it's really important to begin by recognizing that there are currently around 11 million undocumented people living in the United States. And although the issues concerning the treatment of recent arrivals, particularly in the border region, tend to get the most attention, in fact, more than 2/3 of undocumented people have lived here for more than 10 years. Here at the University of California, we feel that problem acutely. We feel it all the time because our community includes many undocumented students. And as our panelists will explain, while many of those students used to be eligible for DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that started under the Obama administration, for the last 5 years, that program has been effectively closed to new applicants. As a result, there are now more than 40,000 undocumented students in higher education throughout the country who do not have DACA, and more than 20,000 undocumented students graduating from high school every year just in California. Now, that creates a lot of problems. And one of the problems it creates concerns employment. Many students in higher education need to work, whether to complete their degrees, which often include a practical component, especially for the graduate level, or just to finance their educations by working at the college bookstore, or the cafeteria, or whatever. But federal immigration law regulates which non-citizens can work and generally prohibits employment for anyone who is not a lawful permanent resident, that is a green card holder, or otherwise authorized to work through their particular immigration status. Or at least that's what most people thought. I mean, that's the Hornbook, what you would be taught if you were studying immigration law or immigration and employment or immigration and labor law. Now, but here at SILP, we're always interested in legal innovation. And about 2 years ago, we began to research an interesting new legal theory. It arises from the fact that the federal law that prohibits the hiring of undocumented people, called IRCA, or the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, does not say that it applies to state governments. It bars persons or other entities from hiring unauthorized immigrants, and it was amended in 1996 to specify that entities includes any branch of the federal government, but not the states. And because we live in a system that requires the federal government and the states to share power, the Supreme Court has long had a rule requiring that when Congress wants to tell state governments what to do as to their own affairs, such as who they can hire for their own jobs, it has to do so explicitly. And so it turns out that state governments may well be able to choose to hire undocumented people, even though IRCA does not permit private employers to do that same thing. And of course, the University of California is an arm of state government, as are many, many other state universities. Of course, it's one thing to hatch a novel idea sitting at your desk, right? But it's something very, very different to turn that idea into actual policy. But that is what is happening here at the University of California. In October of last year, undocumented students and faculty working closely with them launched a campaign to convince the UC to open its educational employment opportunities to all students, regardless of status. This past May, hundreds of people rallied outside a meeting of the Regents of the University of California. Here, you see an image from that protest, as the Regents considered a proposal to permit the hiring of undocumented students. It was a truly powerful event. There were actually more than 400 people present at the rally, and here you see a picture from the end of it. The next day, the UC Regents adopted a policy, and I'm going to put up, thank you so much, Chloe. There's an image of the policy for you, highlighting some of the key language that the university is committed to providing equitable access to education regardless of immigration status, and believes that the benefits associated with that should include employment. Today's panel is about how the legal theory that I was talking about earlier gave rise to the movement that produced that massive rally, and how that movement and the organizing surrounding it led to the policy that I showed. The panel is also about where we go from here to get to the finish line, because as of today, it is still true that the UC is not hiring undocumented students. And I also hope that people watching today can think about this as a case study, both for the same legal idea as applied in different institutions, both educational institutions and perhaps others, and also for other ideas. Well, enough from me, right? We're very, very fortunate to have three brilliant panelists to guide this conversation, each of whom has played a central role in the development of the Opportunity for All campaign. First, we have Kareli Amaya Rios. Kareli, please turn on your camera. Kareli is a first-generation undocumented student, and she's finishing currently her master's in public policy at UCLA. Kareli is a highly skilled organizer and truly a visionary thinker, which I can say from firsthand experience, having worked with her now for more than a year. Kareli has been an inspiration for undocumented students without DACA, and to be honest, to all of us working on the Opportunity for All campaign. Welcome, Kareli. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ahilan.
Second, we also have with us my good friend and colleague, Hiroshi Motomura. Hiroshi, please turn on your camera. Hiroshi is the Susan Westerberg Prager Distinguished Professor of Law and the Faculty Co-Director for the Center of Immigration Law and Policy here at UCLA with me. He is the author of two superb books on immigration law and policy, and has been a leader not only in building the community of immigration law professors, but also in bridging the divide between the academic and practitioner worlds, now for decades. Hiroshi received a Guggenheim Fellowship for his current book project. Thank you so much for being with us, Hiroshi. And last but not least, we have Kent Wong. Kent, please turn on your camera. Good to have you with us here, Kent.
Great to see you, Ahilan.
Kent is the director of the UCLA Labor Center and a professor who teaches both in labor studies and, for many years, Asian American studies. Prior to joining UCLA, Kent was an attorney for the Service Employees International Union, and before that, the Asian Pacific American Legal Center, where he was its first staff attorney. Kent taught the first class in the country specifically about undocumented students. He and his students have published 3 books on the topic and are now working on a 4th. Thank you all for being with us. And I should say to the audience, you can see their full bios in the chat, and we'll also be posting some additional resources in the chat during the course of the webinar from each of our panelists. So let me start with you, Kareli. I described a legal theory, but there was a problem, right? A really serious problem that students without DACA faced. Can you say a little bit about that? What's the sort of student need that is the origin behind the Opportunity for All campaign?
Yeah, thank you, Ahilan, for the amazing intros. And hey, everyone, I am so excited to be here with you all and share a little bit about my story and the many more stories of undocumented folks and what we have to do in order to navigate higher education. So yeah, I think, so as Ahilan said, my name is Kareli Amaya. I was born in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, Mexico. My family and I fled violence in our state and came to the US in 2003 when I was 2 years old. And we came here with tourist visas that actually expired in 2012. And if you guys remember what happened in 2012, that's when DACA was passed. And since in 2012, that was my last exit to say goodbye to my entire family members, due to that exit, was not able to apply for DACA. And yeah, being a first generation low income student, had to survive undergrad at UCLA, work a lot of under the table jobs, and just navigate the system, which was super, super difficult, right? And I think now, being a graduate student studying public policy, entering my last one, it is very standard for grad students across the UCs to be research assistants, teacher assistants. And with that, you're able to get tuition remission and get paid. But due to my immigration status, many more undocumented student immigration statuses, we are barred of those opportunities. And it really sucks because that really contributes to the experiences of being a student here at the UC. And I'm sharing my story because it's not the only story of undocumented students at the UC. Actually, this summer, the Undocumented Student Led Network, which is an organization of undocumented students across the UC, we surveyed 80 students, each of them representing every UC campus, all 10 of them. And we found that 75% of those people that responded to our survey, they don't have DACA. And there's many more coming that do not have DACA and aren't able to survive. And a really just stark, I think, research that we just found as well is that the number of undocumented students at the UC are dwindling. And this is not because there's no more undocumented students. It's because they're not able to be retained at the UC and aren't able to be successful here. So with that, we are seeing that undocumented students are finding a harder time to come into the UC and graduate. And this is not okay. And I think in our interviews, we interviewed over 40 students, and the stories are just so heartbreaking of the things that they aren't able to take part of the things they think that they are able to take part of, make it to the final round of interviews. And at the end, when they find out that they have a certain immigration status, they are turned away. And with everything happening in the world right now, the xenophobia and the attacks on immigrants, to not be accepted on your own campus is also heartbreaking. It's also very alienating and not okay. And those are a little bit of the experiences of what we have to go through. But I think there is hope that it doesn't have to be this way, and that the UC can do something very, very different in order to give access to our undocumented students to be successful and thrive. So yeah, I think that's a little bit about our story. So Ahilan, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Kylie, for sharing that. Let me turn to you, Kent. There's also a faculty need, right? And a faculty origin of this. You have done work researching and supporting undocumented students is a trailblazer, really, in that area for a very long time. Tell us that part. What is the Labor Center's interest in undocumented youth? Where does it come from? Tell us a little bit about that history.
Thanks so much, Ahilan. So for nearly 60 years, the UCLA Labor Center has been a presence that links the university and the broader working class. And the reality is that the working class here in Los Angeles, in California, is increasingly represented by large numbers of immigrant workers. During the pandemic, many of these immigrant workers were celebrated as our essential workers, people who are planting and picking the fruits and the vegetables that we eat every day, people who were working in the supermarkets, people who are working in the retail industries, people who are keeping our economy moving at great risk to personal health. The reality is that a large sector of the new working class of Los Angeles and California are immigrant workers, and that the UCLA Labor Center for decades has been supporting worker justice involving workers of color, immigrant workers, low-wage workers. At the same time, we're teaching here at UCLA, and about 20 years ago, I started seeing a new generation of undocumented students coming to UCLA who didn't have immigration status. And in the 30 years that I've been teaching here at UCLA, some of the finest students in my career have been students like Kareli Amaya, against tremendous obstacles, who are obtaining college degrees, who are going to the University of California, going to Cal State campuses, going to community colleges against tremendous barriers and are succeeding. And yet, how could it be that these young people who have done everything our society has asked them to do, even upon graduating from college, are barred from employment opportunities? Whose interests are being served by this policy? And so I taught the very first class in the country on the issue of undocumented immigrant students, and working with my students, we published 3 breakthrough publications. The first one was Undergrads. The second was Undocumented and Unafraid. And the third was Dreams Deported. These 3 books chronicled the development of the immigrant youth movement in real time, but it also helped to encourage, inspire, motivate, and mobilize a new generation of immigrant youth who, in the tradition of the civil rights movement and the tradition of student movements historically, decided that they were going to step forward and create that change. So in 2011, we launched a national fellowship program for undocumented students called Dream Summer. This year, we hit the 1,000 mark, where over 1,000 undocumented students have gone through our Dream Summer program. And 2 years ago, Kareli and her good friend Abraham, who were the leaders of the undocumented student organization here at UCLA, launched a UC-wide cohort of Dream Summer specifically to organize around empowering undocumented students on the 9-campus UC system to support new opportunities for undocumented students. And so since partnering now with our colleagues at SILP at the UCLA Law School, with the leadership of the Undocumented Student Network, who have been the backbone of this campaign, we are now poised to secure a victory for undocumented immigrant students. So that is what brings us here today. We are hoping to make history. We are hoping that the University of California will come through with the promise that they made back in May of 2023 to move forward a process to hire undocumented immigrant students. This will be a breakthrough not only for the University of California, this will be a breakthrough in the country. Kareli Amaya is currently working with me on book number 4 in our series that will feature art and activism of the immigrant youth movement. I would hire Kareli today if the University of California will give me the authority to do so. And we need her expertise, her knowledge, her skills now. And the punitive policy of blocking undocumented students from employment rights not only hurts the students, their families, it hurts the educational environment, and it hurts the University of California as a whole. So we are very much looking forward to securing this opportunity for all victory. And I guarantee you, as soon as we have that victory, Kareli Amaya will be hired to join our staff.
Well, thank you so much for giving us that rich context, Kent. And between the two of you, you really feel very sharply that sense of a separate but equal educational environment, right? Because you'd hire Kareli now without wait, right? If only for the fact, Kareli, if you had that employment authorization. So Hiroshi, let me turn to you and try and help to clarify something about the legal context that underlies this. Why doesn't DACA just solve this problem now? I mean, Kareli said 75% of the students who she had interviewed in this most recent round of data gathering about undocumented students do not have DACA on the UC campuses. But Kent, you were doing this for years, but then obviously something has changed in the recent past. So can you explain that? What's the legal context underlying this, and why is this not just a problem that's resolved by DACA?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ahilan. And thanks to all of you for being here. This is such an important program, such an important issue, important campaign. And part of what I'm about to say about DACA, to answer the question, maybe things that many of you in the audience may already know, but I also think it's really important that we understand this aspect of the background, because you hear it a lot. It's a myth. I mean, one of the myths that persists out there is the myth that DACA is available to people who were brought to the United States at a young age who might otherwise be undocumented. And that was true through the DACA program, which was for a while. And I'll explain to you what happened, just so we understand the context of this myth, or why it's mythical. And that is that DACA first became available in the summer of 2012. So it became first available. And by the way, I should add that it was an effort that was succeeded through the efforts of undocumented youth, just like today's campaign for opportunity for all. That was very much a campaign that directly affected people. So DACA was a plan. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was a plan adopted by the federal executive branch. This was under the administration of President Barack Obama. And after the presidential election of 2016, the Trump administration takes over, and it moved in its opening months to figure out how to rescind DACA, essentially under the belief, I think, that they figured that what one president adopted, Obama adopting DACA, the next president could undo. And so there was a series of memos from the Trump administration that purported to rescind DACA, but a lawsuit followed in which the University of California, or several lawsuits followed actually, in which the University of California was one of the parties trying to block that effort by the Trump administration to end DACA. And those lawsuits were consolidated. They went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court issued a decision in June of 2020. Right. So, and that decision held essentially that the Trump effort to rescind DACA, did not comply with the required process to rescind. In other words, that its effort to end DACA was for process-related reasons. The way they went about it was just wrong. And that was the essence of that decision. But what happened is it left open the more basic question: did the adoption of DACA exceed the authority of the federal executive branch? That was the question. And this question continues to be in litigation of various kinds. And the current state of things, and this is what we were talking about earlier, about people who have DACA can renew, at least if they do so on a timely basis. If they have the money to do so, there are many obstacles to actually renewing. But no new applications have been approved since 2017. So what you have then is this process. Well, I wouldn't call it a process, but the reality is that the DACA for people who did not have it before is no longer available. So that's one way to think about it. But I can say a little bit more about the current state of things. The precarious thing about DACA is that even for people renewing it, okay, this is completely on the legal basis for DACA. What's precarious for DACA is that the legal basis for it remains contested in the courts. It's likely that the question will go back to the United Supreme Court, and this time it won't be about the process for DACA, but really whether DACA exceeds the authority of the federal executive branch, and whether or not DACA as a whole is valid. There are a couple practical takeaways of this. One is that DACA already ended for people who were not the general minimum age of 15 years in 2017 when approval of new applications stopped. So in a sense, DACA is ending every single day for people who would have applied but can't. This means that they would have to be, I'm not great at math, but 21 years old now at least. And this is why very few undergrads on campus nationwide, including UCLA, but nationwide, have DACA. The second practical takeaway is that there's a substantial risk that DACA will be declared unconstitutional, unlawful for anyone, because it exceeds the authority of what any president can do. And that would be an option. And there's also another risk here, which is that a future presidential administration might follow the correct procedures for rescinding it, even if it is lawful. So that's the precarity of DACA, and this is the reason why the legal background calls for something else, and that's the basis for opportunity for all.
Got it. Yeah, and I think when you were talking about the point about 15 years old, I think the to be eligible for DACA, you had to have been here on June 15, 2007, right?
That too.
So, right, and that I think is the same. It's the flip side of what you're saying, right? That's
Right.
the.
Right.
So Kareli, you came here after that, right? So, or anyway, anyone who would have come here after that would not be eligible for it, right? So then, this is all very, very helpful context to understand how we got into the problem that we sort of confronted, right? That all of you working as actors in this space and me too confronted. But obviously now, here in October of 23, as Ken said, we're on the cusp of potentially moving in a very positive direction on this, right? So how did we get from that problem of there being thousands of undocumented students in the United States without the benefit of DACA, as Ken said, faculty wanting to hire them, but unable to do so because of the rules, and as you said, Hiroshi, the legal pathway stuck because of a bunch of litigation with DACA itself. How do we get from there to where we stand now? And to start there, let me go back to you, Hiroshi, if that's okay. There was this legal theory that I talked about at the very beginning about what IRCA does or doesn't do, but that was just like an idea that we were kicking around, sitting around. Like, how did that sort of get built out and become like the legal foundation for what has now become the substantial campaign?
Yeah, thanks for this question too, because I think it really illustrates what you said in the opening about how one of the things that's important for people who study law or people who feel that they know the law to do is to understand that it takes a lot to take something that might be thought of as legal analysis or legal theory and really put it into practice. And the first step really is to just make sure that it's right and to get different ideas, test counter arguments. And we've done that, and we put a lot of energy into this. Ahilan laid out the basics of legal analysis, saying that basically that IRCA does not apply to state governments because it doesn't say that it does, and that's a standard rule of statutory interpretation. But it's especially true in an area like employment, which is a traditional area of state authority. And that's the basic idea, right? So this is really reflects an idea of sharing of authority between federal and state governments, and that's foundational to the American legal system. Congress could constitutionally make many federal statutes apply to states. It could do that, but if it does that, it must do so explicitly, right? So it cannot be assumed it must be explicit. That's the basic legal idea, but SILP has done a lot of work in the past almost 2 years to research its many nuances, and much credit is due to Astrid Karapetian, who was our law fellow, UCLA class of 2020, and first law fellow here at the center, for doing much of the research to understand these many nuances. And so we have a publicly available legal memo on this, but it goes into a lot of the explanations for the various reasons why the statutory interpretation is correct. Another issue is what counts as the state, because it's not self-evident that the University of California is part of the state, but it's very clear that it is based on research. Another is whether anything in California law might require federal work permits to work in the state of California. In other words, if there's any California law that replace what we're saying is missing in federal law, and there is no such law in California. And what we did next was, I think it's very important, is that we didn't assume that we knew all the answers, but we convened a series of sessions with some of the country's leading experts on immigration law, constitutional law, administrative law. And these experts had a lot of questions, a lot of hard questions. And those questions called on us to do further research and refine our analysis. In the end, we developed this long legal memo, and that's the analysis for the legal foundation of opportunity for all. Now, these aren't the only issues I should recognize. And I'll talk about these, I think, a little bit later in this session, but there are two other sets of issues that are worth flagging. One relates to the implementation of opportunity for all in the University of California. In other words, it's one thing to have the theory, it's another thing to fill out the theory into a full-fledged set of arguments, and it's a third thing to actually implement it. Well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Another set of issues, especially important because we have a nationwide audience today, is that there's another set of issues relates to how this legal analysis might apply in different states where the posture might be a little bit different. I'll talk about those in today's session, but I think the main point is that this is a set of issues, legal issues, that has been very thoroughly vetted and tested with some of the leading experts around the country, and that gives us a confidence in what we have to say.
Thank you so much, Hiroshi. That is a very helpful explanation. Let me turn to you next, Kareli. So okay, there's this legal idea. It's going through pressure testing and research and all that stuff, but that isn't what produces a movement of undocumented youth and puts 400 people outside of the university regents meeting demanding equality, right? How did you do that? I mean, how did you build that organization and strength and build that power to create that effort? Tell us.
We have a dream team. But yeah, no, I would love to share with you all a little bit of the history of what happened. So the campaign actually launched about a year ago, but during October, actually, but the organizing did not, the organizing of what came from the campaign started the summer of 2022. And actually in the school year of 2022, we already had a working group of faculty, professors, and undocumented students figuring out ways that we could demand more resources for undocumented students at the UC level, at the federal level, at the state level, right? So we already kind of had this community already meeting, and we all played a different role. So when the Center for Immigration Law and Policy came together, I think one of the most important things that I saw as a student was, hey, we have this legal theory that impacts you directly. How would you like to move forward, right? Because we, as students, we were the ones that directly were impacted. And we're like, hey, what do we want to do with this, right? So we played around with a lot of different ideas, and we started meeting weekly on how we could put forward this legal theory. And we strategized, and actually we sent one of my best friends in the movement, Abraham, to a regent meeting in September to just give public comment and share with the UCs about our legal theory. And if he got told straight up, no, the UC does not do employment. And I quote, undocumented students already have mental health resources and fellowship resources. And we were like, wow, you think that really makes a difference? There's 2 fellowships that undocumented students have to fight survival of the fittest of who gets access to that. And even when we get access to that and we're already fully funded by the university, we get money taken away because they say, hey, you have other funding coming in. And mental health resources, really? You think that is enough? And so we came back to the drawing table, and we talked about what it was going to take. And luckily, this was not our first campaign led by undocumented students. And we had amazing mentors. And I want to quote Ken Wong, since he's in the room. And I think this really hyped up and started the UC cohort back in 2021. So he told us, everything that exists now is through the organizing of immigrant youth. The California Dream Act was fought for and won by the immigrant youth movement. DACA was fought for and won by the immigrant youth movement. And all the programs that currently exist on the UC campuses were fought for and won by the immigrant youth movement. There was no one in any administration that offered to set up these programs without organizing, without a fight, without a demand. And with that, we really used the inspiration of the movements happening in California, like Health for All, Food for All, that centered undocumented students and the fight for obtaining more resources and the retention of this population. And with that, we toyed around with some names and we came up with Opportunity for All, right? Because we do have an opportunity to access these resources that are very much on the table for us, that we've been barred for a really long time. So in that, the students really wanted to center our voices and our stories. And in that, we started power mapping with the Center of Immigration Law and Policy, with the UC Labor Center, of who we needed to convince of what it was going to take and in the journey. And even when we were talking about Opportunity for All being adopted by the UC, our goal was really to bring undocumented students together and build momentum and build power. And with that strategy, we launched our campaign at the front page of the New York Times, the front page of the LA Times, and very quickly the UC called our lawyers up and was like, hey, what are you guys up to? We said that wasn't allowed. And I think with that just started a beautiful journey of undocumented students across the state attending teach-ins, of attending public comments, and which led to a meeting May 17th, where hundreds of students, like Ahilan mentioned, came together at UCLA. It was over 400 students on the anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education. And we actually, during our rally, we had legend civil rights leader, Reverend James Lawson, come and speak and share about his advocacy, his journey during the civil rights movement, right? That you need to stand up, you need to protest in a nonviolent way to convince these decision makers to stand in the right side of history. And it was just a beautiful, I think, just peak of our campaign where we were able to share our voices and say enough was enough. So the next day on May 18th, the Regents actually had on their agenda to decide on the future of Opportunity for All. And on that day, we had a ton of undocumented students wearing their Opportunity for All shirt. The meeting was supposed to start at 9:30. It did not start till 11:30. So for an hour and a half, 2 hours, undocumented students were outside organizing everyone, giving public comment because they were in a closed session talking about the future of Opportunity for All. And during that meeting, after a lot of undocumented students continued to share their experiences and how this would impact them, and that they had the right and the decision in their hands to give us these opportunities, they cited that they will start a working group to decide the implementation of Opportunity for All. And that was a huge, huge, huge win for us. The UC Regents, the UC in general is the third largest employer in California. And they can set a precedent for what happens at the UC to their undocumented students that can set just a domino effect of what happens in this country, of what happens in other states on giving access for our undocumented students and just undocumented people in general. So I think that's really the history of what happened on that day. I think the next question I'll be able to tell you all, okay, so can undocumented students get hired now? There's so much more we can still do and we need to do in order to secure that win. But with that, pass it back to Ahilan.
No, thank you so much for that explanation. It's a remarkable, stunning achievement to create the political power that you have created. And in such a short time, I mean, to me, it feels like a really short time, given, 2 decades working in the immigrants' rights movement. Just one little thing, I want to turn to Kent because I think it's really important to understand the process of educating elected officials and regents on the subject. But just one little thing more for you, Kadeli, before we do that. A lot of people from around the country are watching this conversation. In many of those situations, the university is in one physical place. Right. I know when we started, this work, at least the students who I interacted with, you, Abraham, Jeffrey, Carlos Alarcon, you were all based in UCLA, but the organizing you've done geographically has been on all the campuses, right? And that obviously presents a complexity, which actually makes it harder probably to do here than in many other university contexts, right?
Yeah, no, I think it was just beautiful to see and connect with other undocumented students and undocumented student organizations at every campus and realize the need, right, on those campuses. But like I mentioned on the report that we did this summer, all of our experiences are very similar and intertwined because we've all been barred from the same experiences at the UC level. So this really built a momentum and hunger from folks that knowing that when we come together we are constituents of the UC, right? As a undocumented person, I might not be able to vote on, you know, federal, state elections, but as a UC paying student that pays tuition, I do, and I have rights, and the UC has the right to retain me and give me access to opportunities that all of my other classmates do have. So in that, I think we have undocumented students from all across the states that will be doing teach-ins, that have been coming to public comment, and have really been demanding for opportunity for all to be implemented.
Thank you so much. So yeah, Kat, let me turn back to you. You know, even if you have 400 people clamoring outside, you know, demanding justice, ultimately the decision makers are the regents, who are obviously elected officials of the state of California. And it's about bringing the education and research and all the kind of understanding, both the legal side and the, you know, sort of student need side to them. Right, you've been instrumental in making that possible in this campaign, as if your colleagues at the Labor Center. Tell us a little bit about that, how you approach that, how you think about it, what aspects of that for somebody who's in a different institution, looking, you know, watching what UC is doing, what you are doing, you know, how they can kind of understand how you made that happen.
Thank you, Ahilan. I always love hearing Kareli because her enthusiasm, her energy, the power of her words inspires us all. And what she said, which is very true, is that everything that has been secured within the immigrant rights arena has been fought for. And California, in many ways, has led the nation in terms of passing the California DREAM Act, which has provided state financial aid to undocumented immigrants. That has resulted in thousands and thousands of undocumented students who otherwise would be effectively barred from higher education to pursue their educational dreams. That was fought for by the immigrant youth movement. The immigrant youth movement fought for healthcare access for undocumented students during the pandemic, when it was clear that if some of us don't have healthcare, none of us are safe. And so based on the victory secured by the immigrant youth movement for health for kids, it was expanded so that California is now on record as providing healthcare access to 2 million undocumented immigrants. The immigrant youth movement supported the fight for the California driver's license for undocumented immigrants. 2 million undocumented immigrants have access to the driver's license now, which is in everybody's best interests. It provides more public safety. It provides you know, more adherence to the laws with regard to traffic safety. So these are things that were fought for and won by the immigrant youth movement. And I have had the privilege of teaching a class with Reverend James Lawson Jr. for more than 20 years on nonviolence and social movements. And Reverend Lawson has taught many of our undocumented student leaders about the power of nonviolent campaigns, that these immigrant youth understood the power dynamics. They understood who they needed to reach to convince decision makers to do the right thing. That when they lifted up their voices, when they emerged as a moral compass for this public university, those voices were compelling. And the fact that we got a unanimous vote, that every single member of the UC Regents agreed with them. They said, how could it be that we are asking our young people to go to school, to obtain college degrees, to work hard, to study hard, to contribute to our society? How could it be that we are treating them differently about something under which they have absolutely no control? And that is where they were born. And so very much in the spirit of Reverend James Lawson Jr., very much in the spirit of the civil rights movement, and in the legacy of Brown versus Board of Education that struck down the fallacy of separate but equal and challenged the blatant policies within public education that unfairly penalized people based on the color of their skin, based on their national origin, and indeed today, based on their immigration status. So our students have learned from Reverend Lawson. Our students have learned from the legacy of the civil rights movement. And I am so proud that they have been leading this fight nationally to demand opportunity for all.
Thank you, Kent. I'd say all of us have learned from you. Your historical perspective and all this has really just been extraordinary. Let me switch gears a little bit and talk about where we go from here. And I want to do it starting in the sort of opposite of what you might expect, starting in the biggest picture, like national political context, and then down to talking about other states and other institutions, and then down to what is happening right here at the University of California. So Kent, if you don't mind, I want to stay with you for a minute, but ask you about a really sort of different kind of question. You are a keen observer of the immigrants' rights movement and the political landscape more generally. This is happening. This campaign is happening under the Biden administration, and not, as we're approaching an election year. Obviously, the Biden administration did not solve the problem Hiroshi was talking about the fact that nobody who came here after 2007 is eligible for DACA, although obviously the courts have a lot to do with that as well. It's a sort of complicated political picture. What do you see as how this movement, the Opportunity for All movement, how it fits into the current political context with respect to immigrants' rights and undocumented people's rights more generally across the national landscape? And how do you see that sort of affecting both the campaign here, but also the immigrants' rights movement as it's sort of going forward in this time?
We are a deeply divided society. We are a deeply divided country. And the issue of immigration has been embraced by white supremacists and by those who are trying to roll back hard-won civil rights gains of decades past to victimize, to attack, to criminalize immigrants. And the failure of sound immigration reform, unfortunately, has been a bipartisan failure that Barack Obama, in spite of his many good contributions, led the deportation of 2 million undocumented immigrants. And although President Biden ran on a promise to enact immigration reform, to expand and defend DACA, he has failed to do so. On the other hand, you have the looming force of another potential rematch, and Donald Trump staking his campaign off whipping up racial hatred and attacking immigrants as criminals and rapists. So this is a very challenging political environment. We need to stand on the right side of history. We need to do the right thing, and we need to promote a message of racial harmony, of racial tolerance, of a characterization of the rich history of the United States that was built on the backs of immigrants. And the immigrant youth today who are leading this fight for opportunity for all are the very best, most gifted, most talented, most visionary advocates that we have in the country today to challenge the racist narrative that we are seeing and to win the hearts and minds of the people of this country. They are doing everything our society is asking them to do. Let them practice law and medicine and education and social work and engineering. Let them use their gifts and talents to contribute to our society. And why are you standing in the way? Why are you blocking their interest to contribute to our society? The vast majority of people in this country support Dreamers. The vast majority of people in this country support DACA. It was Obama's handlers back in 2012 who warned him, if you enact DACA, if you do the right thing and stand with immigrant youth, you are going to pay the consequence of a right-wing backlash that will lead to your defeat in your re-election campaign. In fact, the opposite occurred. And when he enacted DACA, his popularity went up, and he gave especially communities of color a reason to mobilize support for Obama, who was doing the right thing and enacting immigration policies that not only served the best interests of immigrants and communities of color, it served the best interests of our society as a whole. 800,000 people have benefited from DACA, who no longer live under the daily fear of deportation, who can now use their talents to contribute to our society, and who have been able to lift up out of poverty. DACA has meant a 40% wage benefit for young people who no longer have to live in the underground economy. And yet the diehard white supremacists want to strip that work authorization from teachers, from social workers, from government employees, from university workers, from people who are working with me at the UCLA Labor Center. Their jobs are hanging by a thread if the right-wing assault on DACA is successful. So Biden should do the right thing, not because it's going to enhance his election opportunities, re-election opportunities. He should do the right thing because that's what he believes in, that he believes in opportunity for all. He believes in democracy. He believes in giving young people a chance to determine their own future by succeeding in education and getting a job to contribute to our society. That's what Biden should do. And I bet that he would be rewarded just as Obama was rewarded.
Thank you, Kent. Now, moving down just like one level of generality, right? There's this question, okay, that's the national political context that we're living in, really trying to, for people to understand how similar the politics are of O4A as they were to DACA, right? But then there's also just educational institutions elsewhere in the country, could be in California, but certainly in other states as well, that are interested in potentially modeling this. And I should say we already have questions in the Q&A that are asking, what about doing this in the state of Washington or in other places? Hiroshi, can you tell us a little bit, like, does this transfer, what we're talking about, does this transfer to other educational institutions in other states? And if so, how? What are the barriers that might arise? Yeah, speak to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, it does transfer, but I think it is really worth looking in more closely as to why it transfers and what the obstacles might be, frankly. A couple of aspects to this, where we go in other states. And the first one actually digs deeper into the California story because it relates to the implementation of O4A in California. And I've talked to interested groups in other states, and often the question really is, how do we actually implement this? So this is concluding the California story, but it's also part of the question of whether it translates into other contexts. So I'll start with those practical details. And the other big topic is how the legal issues might vary in other states. So on the implementation piece, I mean, as we've already talked about a couple of times in this session, that UC Regents committed unanimously to develop an implementation plan by the end of November. So it's really a little over 4 weeks from now. It's very practical. So, we here at SILP have done a great deal of work on this with the help of a law firm with lots of experience in the intersection of employment and immigration law. And I don't want to make this, you don't want me to make this webinar into W2 and W4 forms, but so I'm not going to get in the fine details here.
Well, watch the registration just drop right
off.
I
know, that's right. But and I've already said, more than I know about W2 and W4 forms in concreteness. But look, there are three basic things that have to happen, right? You've got to be able to onboard employees in the payroll system. You have to make sure they're paid and that state and federal taxes are paid properly. The second task is you need to get employee information into the system without using the full version of the federal I-9 form that are established is normally used to get personal information. And you also need to make sure that proper tax withholding takes place. The bottom line is all this is quite doable, especially given the relatively small number of people, the 4A employees that we anticipate. I mean, it's also a good time to remind people this is not a special program for hiring undocumented people. It's simply allowing access to the same employment opportunities for these jobs. This is not a set aside or anything like that. Okay. So we here at SILP are developing our own plan. Basically, I suppose you'd call it a shadow plan, where I would suggestions for implementation based on our research and investigation. We hope to be able to share some aspects, the general aspects of that plan in the next several weeks. Excuse me. Now, another major aspect of where we go from here is the legal questions that might vary from state to state. Here's some legal issues to flag. There is no California law that forbids or that requires federal work permits to hire in the state of California. But one issue that states need to look into, or people in different states need to get into, is whether there is a state law in your state that, independent of the federal law, whether there's a state law that bars the hiring of people, sorry.
Yoshi, do you want me to swap?
The hiring of people without federal work authorization. This varies from state to state, what it actually says. And also, does it require just a check, or does it forbid employment? That's an important distinction. Another big issue that's going to have to be researched from state to state is what counts as part of the state. And that question is going to arise in different states, depending on state law, as to cities, counties, and school districts. And then going beyond the legal issues, one of the things that comes up is, for every state, what is actually the decision-making structure in the state? Who makes the decisions? Is it a state legislature? Is there an independent board of regents? Is there a commission of higher education? Things like that. And then getting off the legal part, I mean, where is the organizing strength? Where is the support from allies? And similar questions are going to arise from state to state. And these are the topics that have tended to come up in conversations I've had in other states. And it's going to vary. It's going to take work of, obviously, in the organizing sense, but also in investigating these legal issues, because they do vary and they can get complicated, but they're certainly manageable.
Great, thank you so much, Hiroshi. Kaede, I'm going to turn to you now to talk about the local, like right here at UC. Before I do that, I want to let people know the the Q&A is open, and we're looking at questions. There are already some that have come in, but if people have other questions, please put them there, and we're going to turn to those as soon as Kaede answers my next question. So I guess if you think about what has happened here, it's a confluence, right, of faculty and students kind of having this demand, the organizing that came out of it, and a legal theory underlying it. And that's how we got to where we are now. But it is still not true that there's students being hired at the University of California. We've heard there's this implementation plan. You've just heard Hiroshi say it's manageable. So what's next? How do we get the UC to close the deal? How can we get it so that you actually are working with as an employee for the Labor Center, along with many of your colleagues, as soon as possible?
Yeah, no, thank you, Ahilan. And yeah, I mean, we have not stopped working since that decision in May. But as you could see, as I presented earlier, we launched in October. And in September, when Abraham went, they told us straight up no. So to have received an answer in May saying, yes, we are adopting it, that is a huge win. That is not the end of it, though. A real, a final win for us is when the first undocumented student receives their first paycheck, not only hired, receives their first paycheck at the university. And that will also not be the end of this campaign, right? Because we will spread to other campuses, other states to also do the same. And this is a real movement that all of us, the students, the faculty, the staff, the community, everyone plays a role. And so in November 7th, we're actually going to be having a teach-in here at UCLA, but there's going to be watch parties across all the UCs to join, where we will talk more about the nitty-gritty of this implementation plan, what it would look like, as well as, right, resource drive for us of other people can use to see how we made this happen will launch, as well as the research report I was talking about earlier, as well as an advocacy, right, as an advocacy tool to continue to push the UC to do the right thing. They told us in May that they were going to have a working group work on this, and now it is our responsibility to continue pushing them to have an implementation plan roll out. So in November 14th to the 16th, the regents will be meeting again at UCLA, and is where we're trying to have a lot of people come out and give public comment and let them know that our eyes are on them, that they have the authority to do it. And folks join us from other states, other campuses. What you can do, write them. They will see that the demand is real and that they have big shoes, big hats to fill, and that we want them and that we demand for them to do the right thing. So those are ways as well. I think we're going to be putting on the chat on that you can follow our Instagram page and our website. We'll be updating a lot of these resources for you all to use in your own state. But I think at the end of the day, what I'm trying to communicate with this is to never take no as an answer. These same strategies, when DACA was being advocated for, of oh, what are going to be the risks to our students, you know, to the undocumented people? They're going to get deported, or as well as when licenses were being fought in different states of, oh, the government is going to have all of their information and it's going to be more easy to target them. And these are all scare tactics that they try to impose on us. But if you are an undocumented person, if you live your day every day with fear of what can and cannot happen, I'm from San Diego, and I was in San Diego yesterday, and on my drive up, I passed a checkpoint of, you know, ICE. And that if that checkpoint is on and if I get stopped, immediately I can be deported. But when I have a community, when I'm involved in these issues to advance advocacy, ICE try to deport me. Watch, like I have my people I'm gonna be calling on, and it's gonna look super bad on you. And I think in those ways we can lean on our community, and we can lean on creative ways of, hey, they've told us no before. We have the best attorneys in the entire country advocating, you know, that we are right. No one so far has challenged our legal theory. They've only politicized it, and oh, what is the right gonna think? But in that, our stories have way more power on polarization, on politics, because that wins the hearts of the decision makers. And that's what we have to continue to do, right? Come together, bring people together, and share that justice is the way, and the opportunity for all needs to be adopted now because of its huge impact. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is such a powerful message. Your point about building community as a way of dealing with the vulnerability that comes from being undocumented, right, as a result of a set of unjust laws. Thank you so much for sharing that. So a couple of things then are questions that I'm going to pick up in the chat that I think are sort of logistical. So you all correct me if I'm wrong. There's a question about whether the legal memo that Hiroshi mentioned is available to be shared, and it's public, right? It was when it was signed by, I think, 29 other law professors. It's out there on the web. I think we'll see here, but I think we can put that in the chat. That's one. There's a question about whether the research that Kareli, you were mentioning with your study of other undocumented students throughout the University of California, whether that's available publicly. I'm guessing the answer to that question is not yet, but it's going to be soon. Is that right? In a few weeks. There's a question about whether the teach-in that you referenced, Kareli, from November 7th, whether people can attend that virtually. Do you know the answer to that question?
Yes, we will be going live on our Instagram. So it will also be, I think it's going to be virtually available to all the UCs to watch on a teach-in party. But yeah, I think I would say follow that and you'll get more details of if it's either going to be through a live or through a Zoom.
Next question, I think, is properly directed to Hiroshi. Is the legal theory here applicable for any state-run institution that offers employment, or only to educational institutions? And can you speak to that? Yeah, that's the question.
Well, the short answer is that it applies to any state employer. So the campaign here, the need has been localized in the University of California, but it applies to other educational institutions and to any state employer. Leaves open the question, of course, as I mentioned earlier, what counts as a state? But the short answer is any state employer.
Thank you. There's a question here about community colleges. I mean, obviously, those are state institutions. If the question is in California, are they state institutions? The answer is yes, to the same degree as University of California. But I feel like, I don't know if this is something you might be interested in, Kent, or any of you. It's also a question, what are the considerations to determine if they might be allowed and interested in hiring undocumented students?
The reality is that community colleges in the state of California have more undocumented students enrolled than any other higher education system in the country. So we are very hopeful if we can secure opportunity for all soon within the University of California, that we should also encourage the California State University system with their more than 24 campuses to do the same. And we should encourage the community college system in the state of California with their dozens and dozens of campuses to do the same as well. We also encourage other colleges and universities, public colleges and universities across the country to begin this as well. This is a very exciting moment. This is a very exciting campaign. For years, the vast majority of immigrant rights battles have been defensive to stop them from deporting our community members, to stop them from stripping temporary protective status, to stop them from weaponizing immigrants and treating them as animals and shipping them to other parts of the country, as has been done by the governors of Texas and Florida. The horrendous anti-immigrant policies that have been pushed throughout conservative jurisdictions and states. This is a forward-looking, proactive, tangible victory for undocumented immigrant students that will materially improve their lives and will improve the lives of their families, their communities, and the very public universities and colleges where they're enrolled.
Thank you, Kent. And I should add, community colleges, the same is true of California State as well, right? The California State University certainly has more undocumented students. It has more students as well, but certainly has more undocumented students than the UC does. I think the campaign started here because this is where you all were and where the nexus of our three sort of organizations were, but it could easily have started in Cal State or in the community colleges as well, right? There's a question here, it's sort of a legal question, Hiroshi, about, but I do think it's worth answering. 8 USC 1621, and that's a provision which limits the availability of state and local public benefits to undocumented people unless there is a state statute which overrides that restriction, essentially requires states to repass benefits laws for undocumented people after 1996. The question here is the restriction on contracts. One of the things it does is it defines public benefits to include contracts. The restriction on contracts seems like it could be a bar for employers wanting to hire undocumented people. Do you have thoughts or research on that question?
Yeah, I mean, one question is whether contracts include, employment in this context, and our theory essentially it does not. But let me make a different point about subsection D. I know this is in the weeds here, but subsection D requires a state law after 1996. But I'm not sure that it requires a specific act of the state legislature. This came up in an earlier situation regarding the licensing of an undocumented lawyer. I remember at that time the issue came up, and I don't think that the federal government can dictate how any state passes its laws, and so, or in other words, how to enact its laws. And so, if the University of California does something that counts as a form of state law, that's basically the idea here, and that qualifies with the 1621 provision. Because remember, 1621 is a provision that says the federal government requires that states give undocumented people benefits, even assuming this is a contract. It must act after 1996, and this would be a state decision after 1996. That's the idea here.
I just want to say I had other thoughts, but for those of you who knew me from my prior ACLU days, wonder why I came to UCLA, is to work with this kind of creativity. I don't know if people followed that or if it's even worth bothering to explain in any detail, but it's such a really brilliant idea. This kind of thing happens all the time, in our in our office when we chat. And I think it's absolutely right. I mean, the UC regents are an arm of the government of the state of California, and so it would make sense that when they pass policy, that counts as the state of California enacting a form of legislation. So thank you for that.
I'm glad to hear that you think it's creative, but I hope it's not the kind of creative that goes into the too creative.
No, I think it makes perfect sense.
The kind of creative is, I think, self-evident.
Yeah. Let's switch gears here a little bit. There's a question about a professor in Davis who's wondering, how do the students in Davis who are interested in this learn more about the work that USN is doing, and Kareli, you and your colleagues at USN are doing?
We're on the same wavelength, Ahilan. I just sent my reply to that question. But I think for more folks to hear about that, so we actually have bi-weekly campus advocacy calls that if students want to get involved into those, would love to loop you all into the Google Calendar, into those calls. But as well as I linked the sign-on letter for the campaign. So actually on that sign-on letter is if you want to support the initiative Opportunity for All, there you can actually read the full letter that we sent to President Drake when we launched this campaign. So that listserv is a listserv we also use to give updates to folks on where the campaign is going. So when we got the big win in May, we sent out an email to that listserv, what was happening. So I am thinking the same thing will happen as we lead up to November 30th. So
thank you, Kareli. We only have a couple minutes left here. I want to quickly, maybe I'll just take the moderator's prerogative and answer this one question. Do you anticipate this moving through the courts up to the Supreme Court? And I think I'll just in the interest of time quickly say, it's not at all clear that anybody other than the federal government could challenge this program in court in a way that would allow them to get to federal court, because standing rules is sort of complicated. Basically, like if a third party wanted to challenge the UC policy allowing its own professors to hire its own students, it may well be that the only way to bring that challenge would be in state court, and that the highest court there to address that question then would be the California Supreme Court. In contrast, probably the federal government could sue it. And probably if the federal government did that, they could sue it in federal court. And then, who knows? We're talking about a hypothetical lawsuit. Given what Kent was saying earlier, it may well be that the Biden administration decides it's not good idea to sue the University of California for allowing people like Kareli to get the opportunities that they deserve. But yes, if that were to happen, then that is potentially then a long road, but like DACA, a road that could end up in the Supreme Court.
What's great about this campaign, Ahilan, is we have brilliant immigration attorneys, but the leadership of this campaign is our undocumented immigrant students. And we are not only fighting a legal battle, we are also fighting for the hearts and minds of people throughout this country who will support this just demand for undocumented students to gain work authorization and the right to use their skills to contribute to our society.
Thank you so much, Ken. I can't think of a better note to end this conversation on, and we're at time. So I want to thank all the three of you for taking the time and for all the work that you have done on this campaign over the last several years. And I look forward to working with you all more in the time to come. So with that, I think we have to say thanks and thanks for all of you to all of you for joining us as well.